A single mother, a dying kitchen, and the debt that finally came due, just the parts you're about to throw away. Please, just enough for my daughter. The woman said it low, almost under her breath, like she was hoping the words would be smaller if she said them quietly. Her hands were shaking, not from cold. It was 91 degrees in Port Ellison, South Carolina, and the air smelled like low tide and diesel and somebody's charcoal grill 3 doors down. Isaiah Simmons looked at her for a long second before he answered. She had a little girl by the hand. 6, maybe 7. The girl wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking past her, through the screen door, at the pot of gravy going low and slow on the back burner, and she had the particular stillness of a child who has learned not to ask for things out loud. "Ma'am," Isaiah said, "come in out of that heat. We don't need." "I didn't say what you needed. I said come in." That was as far as the story usually would have ended, if this had been any other Tuesday. A tired man feeds 2 hungry strangers, and everybody goes home a little lighter. But what Isaiah Simmons did not know yet, what he had no way of knowing, was that the woman standing in his doorway used to sit 2 rows over from him, in the 5th grade, at Port Ellison Elementary, back when his family's restaurant still had a line out the door on Saturdays, and her family still had a house instead of a room at her mother's. He did not know that she had spent 11 years working her way up to a job she was good at, and had lost it in 9 minutes for doing the one thing her mother raised her to do, which was tell the truth to somebody who did not want to hear it. He did not know that the man who had walked out of this same restaurant 20 minutes earlier, a big man in a windbreaker who had called Isaiah a fool to his face and left him owing 3 months of stock he could not pay for, was, at that very moment, standing on a dock 4 miles away, doing something in the dark that could end his career, if anybody with the nerve and the knowledge to prove it ever came looking. She did not know any of that either. Not yet. All she knew was that her daughter was hungry, and she had exactly $4, and pride had gotten a lot more expensive than it used to be. This is the story of what happened after Isaiah Simmons said, "Come in, out of that heat." And it is also the story of a real medical condition brought on by grief and overwork that most people have never heard of. A food safety law that exists to protect a shrinking coastline, and one man's decision that the easiest way to keep his power was to make sure nobody around him ever had any. Stay with me. Port Ellison sits where the marsh starts eating the road, about 40 minutes from Beaufort, the kind of town where everybody's grandmother knew, everybody else's grandmother, and the shrimp boats still came in at the same dock they'd been coming in at since before anybody currently alive could remember different. Simmons' house had been open on Bay Street for 41 years. Isaiah's grandfather, Ezekiel Simmons, built it out of a bait shack in 1983 with a cast-iron pot, a family gravy recipe nobody had ever written down, and the conviction that a plate of shrimp and grits should cost what a working man could afford after a full day on the water. Isaiah was 38 now. Quiet. The kind of quiet that made strangers think he was unfriendly until they'd been coming around long enough to learn it was just how he was built. He'd taken the restaurant over 8 years ago when his father passed, running the kitchen the way his grandfather taught him. Low heat, patience, a gravy that took 4 hours and could not be rushed, no matter how bad the day was going. The day was going bad more often than not lately. Wild-caught shrimp out of the low country had gotten scarce and expensive 3 years running. Everybody blamed the water. Warmer summers, they said. Fewer shrimp coming up the creeks to spawn. Isaiah bought his shrimp from one man, because one man controlled the docks that fed this whole stretch of coast, and that man's name was Cyrus Devereaux. Isaiah stood at the register that morning looking at a price sheet that had gone up for the 4th time in 14 months. 6 months ago, it had been $9 a pound. Now it was 14. Before that, 6. He could raise his prices to match it. He had, a little, each time, and each time a few more regulars stopped coming, the way water finds a crack and just keeps finding it. He could see the empty tables reflected in the front window glass, 7 of them at 11:30 on a Tuesday, in a dining room that used to need a wait list. He had not told anybody he was 3 months behind on his lease. The notice from his landlord was folded in the bottom of the cash drawer where he didn't have to look at it every time he rang somebody up. On the wall behind the register hung a photograph of Isaiah Simmons, 61 years old in the picture, laughing at something outside the frame, an apron tied twice around a waist that had gotten thinner in his last years than anybody liked to remember. Ezekiel used to say it to Isaiah every single night before close, the same 6 words, like a blessing or a debt collection notice depending on the day. Feeding somebody is never a one-way street, boy. Isaiah touched the frame the way he touched it most mornings. He didn't know yet how true that was about to get. That was when he heard the truck. Cyrus Devereaux did not knock. He never did. He came through the front door of Simmons' house like he owned the building, which, in the sense that mattered most, the sense of who controlled the only working shrimp dock within 40 miles, he basically did. He was 62, heavyset, sunburned the particular red of a man who had spent 40 years on boats and had stopped pretending sunscreen was for him. He looked around the empty dining room and made a small, satisfied sound through his nose. Slow day, Isaiah. Afternoon, Cyrus. You owe me for last month, half of it, and this month's invoice is sitting on my desk with your name on it, and no check attached. I know what I owe you. Do you? Cyrus set 2 thick fingers on the counter and drummed them once, like he was testing whether the wood underneath was still solid. Let me lay it out plain, since plain seems to be the only language that gets through to you. You didn't finish high school. Your daddy pulled you out to work these fryers when you were 16. You've never run a business a day in your life that didn't come pre-built by somebody smarter than you. And now the tide's going out on you, and you're standing here acting surprised. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything. Your granddaddy built something people respected, Cyrus said, quieter now, which was worse. You're going to lose it because you don't know the first thing about running a real operation. That's not cruelty, son. That's just arithmetic. He turned and looked out at the empty room one more time, like he was appraising it for parts. You've got till Friday, he said. Pay what you owe or I stop the truck. No shrimp, no restaurant, simple as that. The screen door banged behind him on the way out. Isaiah stood there with his hands flat on the counter. For a long moment, the way a man stands when he's trying to keep something from showing on his face in front of an empty room that couldn't see him anyway. He did not know that the truck Cyrus climbed into that afternoon was not headed back to the processing plant. He did not know that in 4 days, a woman with a shaking voice and a food safety background she hadn't used in 2 years was going to walk down to that same dock in the dark and see something that would end up mattering a great deal more than 3 months of unpaid invoices. Right now, all Isaiah Simmons knew was that he had until Friday, and it was already Tuesday, and the woman who was about to change his whole life was standing at his door. Amara Whitfield had exactly $4.30 in her account, and a daughter who hadn't had a hot meal since Sunday. She'd told herself she wasn't going to do this. She had stood outside Simmons' house for 11 minutes working up to it, Zuri's hand in hers, watching the steam roll off the gravy pot through the screen, and telling herself there had to be another way. There wasn't. Her unemployment had run out 3 weeks ago. Her mother, back in Beaufort, was stretched as thin as she, and pride, it turned out, didn't fill a 6-year-old's stomach, so she'd asked for the parts he was throwing away. Now she was sitting at a table in Simmons' house, mortified, while a man she barely remembered set 2 full plates down in front of her and her daughter, not scraps, not the trimmed-off bits, a full plate of shrimp and grits with gravy poured generous over the top, and said, "Eat first, talk later." Zuri did not wait to be told twice. She picked up her fork with both hands like she was afraid it might be taken back. Amara looked up at the man standing across the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, not making a show of watching them eat, just letting them eat. "Thank you," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Don't mention it. I mean it. You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," he said simply, without making it a kindness she owed him for, and something about that, the plainness of it, made her chest go tight in a way $4.30 never had. Zuri looked up between bites. "This is really good, Mama. I know, baby. Can we come back? Amara opened her mouth to say something gentle and final, the kind of no she'd gotten good at telling her daughter this year. But the man behind the counter was looking at her now, really looking, in a way that made her sit up a little straighter. You're Amara, he said. Not a question. She blinked. Do I know you? Port Ellison Elementary. Mrs. Faison's class. You used to help me with my times tables at recess because I was too embarrassed to ask the teacher twice. Something shifted behind her eyes. A door in a hallway she hadn't walked down in 25 years creaking open. Isaiah, she said slowly. Isaiah Simmons. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him for a long moment, at the tired lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in the 5th grade, and felt something complicated rise up in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. She did not know that within 4 days her old classmate would be lying in a hospital bed with a heart that had stopped working right, and that whether Simmons' house survived the month would come down almost entirely to her. She had absolutely no idea that she was about to need every single thing her old job had taught her, and that it was about to matter more than it ever had when somebody was still paying her to know it. She came back the next morning. Not to eat. Thank him properly, she told herself, though some part of her that she wasn't examining too closely just wanted to see the place again, wanted to see him again standing at that stove like he'd been carved out of the same wood as the counter. Isaiah was scrubbing down the grill when she walked in, and he looked up like he'd half expected her. I want to work, Amara said before she could talk herself out of it. I know I look like I need charity right now, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. But I'm not asking for a handout, Isaiah. I'm asking for a job. He set the rag down. I can't pay much, he said. I'll be straight with you. This place might not make it past the month. I owe money I don't have. But if you want the work, I've got it. And Zuri's welcome to sit right there at that corner table every single day, long as she wants. Amara felt her eyes sting and blinked it back hard. What happened to you, Isaiah said. That a woman who talks the way you talk is standing in my kitchen asking for a dishwashing job, she told him. Not all of it, not that first day, but enough. 11 years at a seafood processing company out of Charleston, working her way from line inspector to quality assurance manager. A husband who left when things got hard instead of when things got easy, which she said was somehow worse. And 9 months ago, a report she'd filed. Through the proper channel, exactly the way she'd been trained, flagging a batch of product that hadn't passed cold chain inspection, but was about to ship anyway because a regional director didn't want the write-off on his quarter. They called it a restructuring, she said. They restructured me out the door 11 days after I filed that report. Told everybody else it was budget cuts. Everybody in that building knew exactly what it was. You did the right thing. I did the right thing, and I've been unemployed for 9 months because nobody in my industry wants to hire the woman who reported her last company. She said it flat, without self-pity. The way you report a fact you've made peace with, because there's no other choice. I'm not too proud to wash your dishes, Isaiah. I'm just tired of being punished for the one thing I'm actually good at. Isaiah was quiet for a second. Then don't wash dishes, he said. Watch how I do things instead. You've got an eye. I saw it yesterday, the way you looked at my kitchen before you ever looked at the food. Watch and tell me what you see. She didn't know it yet, but that sentence was going to end up being the only reason Simmons' house still existed a year later. That night, Amara called her mother from the small rented room she and Zuri shared on the edge of Beaufort, sitting on the closed lid of the toilet, so the phone call wouldn't wake her daughter through the thin apartment wall. You got a job, her mother said, and Amara could hear the careful hope in it, the kind her mother had learned to ration over the last 2 years. At the Simmons place, Isaiah's boy. It's not much, Mama, he can't pay me what I was making before. Barely anything, honestly, until the place is steady again. Baby, $4.30 was what you had this morning. Anything is more than that. Amara pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. The landlord called again. We're 2 months behind. If I can't catch up by the end of next month, he said he's starting the eviction paperwork. Her mother went quiet on the line, the particular quiet of a woman doing math she didn't like the answer to. You and Zuri can always come stay with me, you know that. Mama, your place has 1 bedroom, and Zuri's already changed schools twice in 2 years. If we move again, Amara's voice caught. I promised her this year would be different. You didn't do anything wrong, Amara. You told the truth at that company and they punished you for it. That's not a mark against you, no matter how many months of unemployment try to make it feel like one. I know that in my head. Amara wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I'm just tired of being the kind of mother who has to keep explaining to her daughter why things are hard. You're not that kind of mother, her mother said, firm now, the way she used to be firm when Amara was small and skinned a knee and needed somebody to tell her the bleeding would stop. You're the kind of mother who kept trying. Zuri's not going to remember $4.30, baby. She's going to remember that you never once stopped trying to fix it. Amara held on to that on the drive home, and, for the 6 weeks that followed, on every single morning, she woke up before Zuri and drove to Simmons' house to keep a dying restaurant's doors open. It was the only thing standing between her and giving up. She did not know yet that the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter was about to become the least of what she had to fight. Zuri turned out to have her own kind of magic. She was a quiet, watchful child, the kind who noticed things adults missed, and within her first week camped out at the corner table, she had gone through half a box of colored pencils, drawing everything in sight. The black iron pots, her mother's hands, Isaiah at the stove, with his back curved the exact way it curved when he was concentrating. One afternoon she held up a drawing of Isaiah at the grill, done in quick, confident lines, and asked if she could pin it to the specials board. Isaiah looked at it for a long moment. Yeah, he said, put it up. The chalkboard out front, which used to just list the day's catch, got a small, careful drawing taped in the corner the next morning. A plate of shrimp and grits with steam curling off it in Zuri's careful crayon. People walking by on Bay Street slowed down to look at it. A woman stopped, smiled, took a photo of it with her phone, and posted it with the caption, "The cutest thing on Bay Street this week." Within a few days, customers started asking Zuri to draw them, and she would quick little portraits on the back of the order pad, handed over with the solemn seriousness of a child who took her work very seriously. People kept them, framed a few, came back with their kids to get drawn too. It wasn't enough to fix a restaurant that owed 3 months of shrimp money it didn't have, but it slowed the bleeding, and for the first time in over a year, Isaiah Simmons stood behind his register on a Thursday afternoon and watched every table in the dining room fill up at the same time, and felt something in his chest that he hadn't let himself feel in longer than he wanted to admit. Hope, it turned out, was a dangerous thing to feel right before Friday. Friday came, and Isaiah paid what he could, most of it, not all of it, and Cyrus Deber took the check without a word and left the truck running in the alley the whole time, like he was making a point about how little time he intended to spend in a failing man's restaurant. Shrimp kept coming, barely. The debt kept climbing, barely slower than before. And underneath all of it, something else was happening that nobody in the dining room could see. Amara had started keeping a small notebook. She watched Isaiah cook the way she used to watch a processing line. Timing, temperature, the exact moment the roux turned from blonde to the color of a paper bag, the specific angle he tilted the pot to keep the gravy from scorching on the bottom. She wrote down numbers, minutes, degrees she guessed at because there was no thermometer involved, just 40 years of a man's hands knowing. You don't have to write it down like it's a formula, Isaiah told her one night after close, looking over her shoulder. Everything's a formula, Amara said. Even the things that feel like magic, especially those. My old job, half of what people thought was chef intuition, was really just variables nobody had bothered to measure yet. Isaiah considered that for a second. My granddaddy would have had opinions about being called a variable. Your granddaddy, Amara said, smiling for the first time in what felt like a year. Sounds like he'd have loved being right about something nobody could take credit for. For 3 weeks, Simmons' house climbed slowly back from the edge. The regulars who drifted came back. A few new faces from Zuri's chalkboard drawings turned into paying customers who kept coming back for the food once they'd come in for the art. Isaiah started sleeping less and working more, because that was the only formula he actually knew. More hours, more care, more hands on the pot. Never anybody else's hands but his own. Nobody noticed how grey he'd gone under the eyes until the day he went down. It happened on a Saturday, the busiest day of the week, the exact kind of day Simmons' house hadn't seen in over a year. The dining room was full. Amara was running food. Zuri was drawing a family of 4 at the corner table, laughing at something the littlest one had said. Isaiah was at the stove, plating the 7th order in a row, when his hand went slack around the ladle, and the ladle hit the floor before he did. Isaiah! Amara was across the kitchen before she'd finished saying his name. He'd gone down hard against the prep counter, one hand pressed flat to his chest, his face the color of the flour on the counter behind him. "Call 911, she said to the nearest server, her voice suddenly, completely steady, in the specific way it had been steady in 100 processing line emergencies that had nothing to do with restaurants and everything to do with staying calm when other people couldn't. Now. Zuri had frozen at the corner table, fork halfway to her mouth, watching her mother kneel over a man on the floor with a stillness that was much too old for 6. The ambulance took 11 minutes to get there, which felt like 11 years. Isaiah was conscious the whole time, which, the paramedics later said, was a good sign, though his color didn't agree with them. At the hospital, a cardiologist named Dr. Priya Anand came out to the waiting room where Amara sat with Zuri asleep against her shoulder and gave her the kind of news that comes with a diagnosis code and very little comfort. "It's called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy," Dr. Anand said. "Stress cardiomyopathy. Some people call it broken heart syndrome, though that name undersells how physically real it is. The heart's main pumping chamber temporarily balloons and stops contracting properly. It's triggered by severe emotional or physical stress, grief, financial strain, chronic overwork. The diagnostic code is I5181. It mimics a heart attack almost exactly, but it isn't caused by blocked arteries. It's caused by a body that has been running on adrenaline for too long with nowhere left to put it. Will he be okay? Most people recover fully within weeks to months if, and this is the important part, they actually rest. The heart heals. It needs the underlying stress to come down, or the risk of it happening again goes up." Dr. Anand looked at her carefully. "Are you family?" Amara opened her mouth to say no. "I'm the only one he's got standing here right now," she said instead. That was true enough. Isaiah stayed in the hospital 4 days. He came home under strict orders. No kitchen, no stove, no stress. Minimum 6 weeks before anybody would clear him to stand over a hot pot for longer than it took to make himself a cup of coffee. He said the words out loud in the hospital bed like they were a death sentence because to him, they basically were. "Somebody has to run that kitchen," he said, staring at the ceiling. "There's nobody. It's just me. It's always been just me." Amara sat in the chair beside his bed with Zuri asleep across her lap. "It's not just you," she said. "Not anymore." He looked at her like he wanted to argue and didn't have the strength for it. "I've watched you cook for 5 weeks," she said. "I've got a notebook full of your grandfather's gravy down to the minute. I know I'm not you. I know I can't do what you do, with my eyes closed the way you do. I can keep the doors open. I can keep people fed. Let me try." "Amara, you don't have a choice," she said gently. "You physically cannot stand at that stove for 6 weeks. So the only real question is whether Simmons' house survives those 6 weeks with me running it, or doesn't survive them at all because there's nobody else." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the hospital window, a summer thunderstorm was rolling in off the water. The kind that came almost every afternoon this time of year, right on schedule, like the sky itself couldn't help repeating its patterns any more than people could. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, do it." Neither of them said out loud what they were both thinking, that keeping Simmons' house alive for 6 weeks with a notebook full of somebody else's 40-year-old muscle memory was going to be a great deal harder than either of them wanted to admit. Cyrus Devereaux found out Isaiah was in the hospital before most of Port Ellison did, and he showed up at Simmons' house the very next morning while Amara was still trying to figure out how the walk-in cooler's temperature log worked. "Heard your boyfriend had himself a heart problem," he said, leaning on the counter. Like he owned it. "Heard you're the one running things now." "He's not my boyfriend, and yes, I'm running the kitchen until he's back on his feet." "You." Cyrus looked her up and down like he was assessing a piece of equipment he didn't trust. A single mother with no restaurant experience, 3 months behind on rent by what I hear around town. About to try and run a business that's already 3 payments behind on shrimp. That's not a rescue, sweetheart. That's a slow-motion collapse with better lighting. Amara kept her voice level, the same level voice she used to use walking a nervous line supervisor through a failed inspection. You came here to say something, Cyrus. Say it. I came here to tell you the invoice due Friday doesn't care that Isaiah's in a hospital bed. I don't extend credit out of sympathy, never have. You want shrimp Friday, you find the money Friday, same as always. He straightened up, satisfied with himself. Man like Isaiah at least grew up around this business. You're a woman who got fired from a desk job, trying to play restaurant owner because you've got nowhere else left to go. Don't mistake desperation for competence. I've buried competence for less money than this before, Amara said quietly. You'd be surprised what a woman with nowhere else left to go is capable of, Cyrus. I'd be careful assuming that's a weakness. He laughed, short and humorless, and left without another word, and Amara stood at the register with her hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from the particular fury of being underestimated by exactly the wrong man on exactly the wrong week. She found the money by Friday. She did not know yet that finding it would only buy her a few more weeks before Cyrus decided outright sabotage was more efficient than slow financial pressure. It was harder. Amara reopened Simmons' house 3 days later with the same regulars, the same specials board, and a gravy recipe she had followed to the exact minute in her notebook. It wasn't the same. Something's off, said Mr. Dunlow, a retired dock worker who had been eating at Simmons' house every Tuesday and Thursday since Ezekiel Simmons was still alive to serve him. He said it kindly, apologetically, but he said it. Can't put my finger on it. Tastes good, just don't taste like Isaiah's. Another regular, a younger woman named Pearl who worked at the bank down the street, said almost the same thing 2 days later. Not bad, just different. You do something different with the roux. Same recipe, Amara said, and heard how thin her own voice sounded. Exact same recipe. She went home that night and sat alone at her kitchen table, with a plate of the day's leftover gravy in front of her, staring at it like it had personally betrayed her. She had followed every measurement, every minute, every temperature she'd guessed at with a thermometer Isaiah had never once used in his life, and it still wasn't right because she understood this now, finally, with the particular bitterness of somebody watching a career-long assumption fall apart in real time. A recipe was never actually the whole recipe. 40 years of a man's hands knowing exactly when to tilt the pot could not be transcribed into a notebook, no matter how carefully you tried. Zuri found her there a little after 10, rubbing sleep out of her eyes, wandering out for water. Mama, why are you crying? I'm not crying, baby, she was. Zuri climbed into the chair next to her and looked at the plate of gravy like she was studying evidence. It's still good, Zuri said. It's just your kind of good instead of Isaiah's kind of good. That's not the same as bad. Amara looked at her daughter for a long moment. When did you get so smart? I watch things, Zuri said, with the total unself-consciousness of a 6-year-old stating a fact. Like you do. That was the moment something shifted loose in Amara's chest. Not relief exactly. Something more like permission. She was not going to become Isaiah Simmons standing at that stove. She had spent 2 weeks trying to disappear into his exact technique, and it had not worked because she was not him, and pretending otherwise was its own kind of quiet lie. But she knew something Isaiah didn't. She knew how to take a limited, expensive ingredient and make it stretch into something people would pay for gladly, because that had been her entire career before somebody decided the truth was inconvenient. She knew flavor layering. She knew cost yield. She knew better than almost anybody in this town how to make 4 ounces of good shrimp taste like an entire plate's worth of care. She got up from the table, walked into the kitchen, and started working. By midnight she had something new, a lighter dish, a broth-forward version of the classic, shrimp simmered down with the same gravy base but stretched thin and bright over rice instead of grits, finished with a squeeze of citrus and green onion. It used 1/3 of the shrimp the classic dish required and tasted, when she finally sat down and tried a spoonful with shaking hands, like something entirely its own, not a lesser version of Isaiah's dish, a different dish that happened to be born out of the same 40-year-old gravy. She called it the marsh broth bowl. She put it on the specials board the next morning in Zuri's handwriting, with a little drawing of steam rising off a bowl. It sold out by 1 o'clock. It sold out again the next day and the day after that, and by the end of the week Amara had added a second dish alongside it. A rice bowl, heavier, cheaper, built the same way, stretching the expensive shrimp Cyrus Devereaux kept raising the price on into something a working family could actually afford twice a week instead of once a month. Word got around Port Ellison fast, the way it always did in a town this size. People who'd never eaten at Simmons' house before came in curious. People who used to come Tuesdays started coming Tuesdays and Fridays. Isaiah, still under doctor's orders to stay away from the stove, came in on his 4th week of recovery to sit quietly at the corner table and watch. Amara brought him a bowl of the marsh broth bowl without a word and set it in front of him. He took one bite, went still. "This is it," he said, his voice rough. "This is close, not exact, but close." "It's not supposed to be exact," Amara said. "It's supposed to be honest about what it actually is." He looked up at her. "You saved this place. Your grandfather saved this place 40 years ago. I just found a new way to carry it." She sat down across from him. "That gravy is still the reason any of this works, Isaiah. I didn't replace it. I just figured out I couldn't copy it, so I built something next to it instead." Isaiah looked down at the bowl for a long moment, and when he looked back up, his eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it. "My granddaddy used to say feeding somebody was never a one-way street," he said. "I think I finally understand what he meant." Neither one of them knew yet that the hardest part was still coming, and that it was going to walk in through that front door, wearing a windbreaker and carrying a grudge. Cyrus Devereaux came in on a Wednesday afternoon, and this time he didn't wait for the lunch rush to clear before he made his move. The dining room was 3/4 full. Zuri was drawing a table of tourists near the window. Amara was working the register. Cyrus walked past 4 occupied tables to get to the counter, and every one of them fell quiet as he passed, the way a room falls quiet around a man everybody's afraid of. He looked at the specials board, at Zuri's drawing of the marsh broth bowl. "Rice and broth," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "That what it's come to? Can't even serve a real plate anymore." "It's a real plate, Cyrus," Amara said evenly. "It's just a different one." He looked at her properly for the first time, like he was noticing her as a person and not just an obstacle. "You're the one been running things while Isaiah's been laid up." He said it like an accusation. "Word is you used to work quality control for one of the big processors down in Charleston. Word is you got fired for causing trouble." Amara felt her stomach drop but kept her face still. "That's not exactly what happened." "Don't matter what exactly happened. What matters is what people believe. And right now half this town's starting to believe you're stretching shrimp with water and calling it a specialty to cover the fact you can't afford real portions." He raised his voice on the last part, deliberately, so the whole dining room could hear it clean. "I'd hate for folks to think they're being taken advantage of by somebody who already got run out of one job for cutting corners." The room had gone completely silent. Amara felt every eye on her. "That is not true," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "And you know it isn't." "I don't know anything," Cyrus said, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just planted something he knows will grow on its own without any more tending from him. "I just know what people are going to start saying." He turned toward the door, then stopped and delivered the part he'd actually come to say. "Effective today, I'm done supplying this restaurant. You're 3 payments behind, and now I hear you're serving product that isn't what you claim it is. I'm not putting my name on that. Find your shrimps somewhere else." "Cyrus." Isaiah's voice from the corner table, low and dangerous in a way Amara had never heard from him. "You walk out that door and cut us off, you know exactly what that does to this place." "I know exactly what it does," Cyrus said. "That's the point." He left. The screen door banged behind him the same way it always did, and the dining room stayed quiet for a long moment after, the particular quiet of people who had just watched something ugly happen and didn't know whether it was polite to pretend they hadn't. Amara stood at the register with her hands flat on the counter, and for the first time since she'd walked into Simmons' house with $4.30, she felt something other than gratitude or fear. She felt angry, genuinely, clearly angry. in a way she hadn't let herself feel in the 9 months since her last employer had quietly destroyed her reputation for doing her job correctly. She was not going to let it happen twice. She found out what Cyrus Devereaux was really doing 3 nights later, and it was almost by accident. She'd driven out past the marsh to a bait and tackle shop near the county line, trying to find a second shrimp supplier who wasn't beholden to Cyrus's near monopoly on the local docks, and she was driving back along the causeway road well after dark when she saw lights out on the water where there shouldn't have been any. Small moving lights, low against the black creek, the kind that meant somebody was working a net well past when any legal shrimper would be out. She pulled over, walked partway down the bank, staying low, staying quiet, the old instinct from a career spent noticing things other people missed kicking in before she'd fully decided to act on it. There were 3 men in waders working fine mesh nets through the shallows, hauling up load after load of something small and silver that caught the light. Juvenile shrimp, not the mature catch any licensed boat would be working this time of year. This was closed season. She knew that from a food safety certification course she'd taken years ago, back when sustainable sourcing had still been part of her job. South Carolina closed shrimp season for weeks at a stretch specifically to let juvenile shrimp mature and reproduce, to keep the whole coastal population from collapsing. And standing on the bank, directing the men with quiet, sharp instructions, was Cyrus S. Devereaux. "Get all you can before daylight," he was saying. "Wildlife boat doesn't run this stretch till Thursday. We got 2 more nights." Amara's whole body went cold and still. She understood, standing there in the dark with her heart going hard in her chest, exactly what she was looking at. The shrimp shortage that had been driving prices up across the whole region for 3 years. The shortage Cyrus himself complained about loudest of anyone, blaming warming water and bad luck. Some real portion of it was this: a man illegally stripping juvenile shrimp out of the water during the exact season meant to protect them, year after year, while charging every restaurant on this stretch of coast more and more for the dwindling legal catch he controlled. He was the disease pretending to be the only cure. She backed away slowly, quietly, memorized everything she could, the location, the time, the make of the 2 trucks parked on the bank, and drove home with her hands tight on the wheel the entire way, thinking about food safety certifications and closed seasons and the particular kind of man who profits twice from a crisis he's causing. She did not sleep that night. By morning she had decided to do the one thing she swore 9 months ago she would never let herself be punished for again. She was going to tell the truth, and this time she was going to make sure it couldn't be buried. "I saw it with my own eyes," she told Isaiah the next morning, laying it all out at the corner table before the restaurant opened. "Poaching juvenile shrimp during closed season. That's a wildlife violation. DNR takes that seriously. License suspension, fines in a repeat case. It can go criminal. That's why the shrimp's been getting scarcer every year. That's why he's had every restaurant on this coast by the throat. He's been strangling the supply and blaming the water the whole time." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "You sure it was him?" "I heard his voice giving the orders. I'm sure. One sighting isn't enough," Isaiah said slowly. "Cyrus has been running this town's docks for 20 years. Everybody's scared of him. You go to the county with just what you saw. It's your word against his. And he's got a lot more friends in this county than you do." Amara had already thought of that. There was a young shrimper named Marcus DeLoach who came into Simmons' house most Sundays after church. Quiet, careful, the kind of young man who always looked like he was carrying something he didn't want to set down in front of other people. Amara had noticed months ago the way his eyes would drop whenever anybody mentioned Cyrus's name. She found him at the dock the next afternoon mending a nail alone. "Marcus," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to know I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm trying to stop somebody who's already hurting you and everybody else on this water." He wouldn't look up from the net. "I don't know anything about anything," he said too fast. "I saw Cyrus poaching juveniles 2 nights ago, out past the causeway. I know I'm not wrong about what I saw. What I need to know is whether this is the first time, or whether it's something everybody already knows and nobody said." Marcus's hands went still on the net. For a long moment he didn't say anything at all, and Amara let the silence sit there, the way she used to let silences sit in exit interviews, because sometimes silence did more work than a question ever could. "Everybody knows," Marcus finally said, quiet, not looking up. "Every shrimper on this dock has known for years. Nobody says anything because if you cross Cyrus, he cuts you off the water. No dock access, no ice, no buyer for your catch. He's done it before. Man named Otis tried to report him 6 years ago, and Cyrus made sure nobody in 3 counties would touch Otis's boat. Otis lost everything. Sold his boat for scrap and moved to Georgia. And you've just been watching it happen. What was I supposed to do?" Marcus's voice cracked finally, all the careful control breaking at once. "I've got a mama on oxygen and a little brother in community college. I can't afford to be the next Otis. I've hated myself for it every single season, watching that man take more than the waters got left to give. And I still didn't say anything, because saying something costs everything I've got. I understand that better than you know," Amara said quietly. "I lost my job for saying something true to somebody who didn't want to hear it. I know exactly what it costs." Marcus looked up at her for the first time. "Then why are you doing it again?" Amara thought about Suri asleep in the truck outside, about the $4.30 that had once been everything she had, about Isaiah lying in a hospital bed telling her, about a whole coastline of families paying more every year for less shrimp. Because one man had decided scarcity was more profitable than honesty. "Because it's still true," she said, "whether it costs me or not." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his tackle box and pulled out a small waterproof case, the kind fishermen used to keep photos and licenses dry. "I've been taking pictures for 2 years," he said. "Dates on all of them. Never had the nerve to do anything with them. Kept telling myself I was just keeping proof in case I ever needed it. But I think I was just scared and calling it patience." He handed her the case. "You do something with this that I can't do myself. I'll back you up. All the way. I'm done being scared of that man." That was the moment, Amara would say later, that the whole thing stopped being one woman's word against a powerful man's and started being something the county couldn't ignore. It took 11 days to build the case properly, because Amara did it the way she'd been trained to do everything that mattered. Carefully, documented, unimpeachable. Marcus's photographs dated and time-stamped. Her own written account of what she'd witnessed. Precise down to the minute. 3 other young shrimpers Marcus quietly reached out to, once he'd found his nerve, who were willing to put their names to sworn statements once they saw somebody else had gone first. A pattern going back years, once people finally started comparing notes out loud instead of suffering it alone. She drove all of it to the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources office in Beaufort personally. Sat across a desk from an officer who looked skeptical until he got 3 pages into the file and watched his expression change. "This is significant," he said finally. "Repeated willful poaching during closed season on this scale with this kind of documentation. This isn't a warning and fine situation. This is a full investigation. Possible license revocation. Depending on what we find, this could go to the State Attorney General's office for criminal charges. How long will it take? Faster than you'd think, with evidence this clean." He looked at her carefully. "You did good work putting this together, ma'am. This is the kind of file that actually gets somewhere." For the first time in 9 months, Amara Whitfield left a government office, feeling like the truth was going to matter this time. She did not know that Cyrus Devereaux was about to find out exactly who had reported him, and that he was going to come to Simmons' house one more time to make her pay for it in person. In front of everybody, before the county ever got the chance to make him pay for anything at all. The investigation moved fast, faster than anybody in Port Ellison had ever seen a case against Cyrus Devereaux move, and word of it reached him within the week, the way word always did in a town this size. He came into Simmons' house on a Saturday afternoon, the dining room nearly full, and this time there was no sneer, no performance. His face was the color of a man who has just watched 20 years of leverage come apart at once. "You," he said, pointing at Amara across the dining room. "You did this." The room went still. "I reported what I saw," Amara said, standing her ground behind the counter. "You were poaching juvenile shrimp during closed season. That's not something I did to you, Cyrus. That's something you did to this entire coastline. for years while charging every family on it more money for less shrimp and calling it bad luck. You don't know what you've started, he said. You think DNR investigating me fixes anything? I go down, shrimp gets even scarcer before it gets better. Every restaurant on this coast feels it, including this one. Maybe, Amara said. Or maybe when the juveniles you've been stripping out of that creek every closed season for years finally get left alone to grow, this coastline gets its shrimp population back the way it's supposed to be, and nobody ever has to pay one man's price again, just because he controls the only dock. Cyrus's face went dark red. You ruined me over rice and broth. I stopped you, Amara said, over a crime. There's a difference, and I think you've spent so long being the only powerful man in this town that you forgot there was one. It was Marcus Deloach who spoke next, standing near the door with two other young shrimpers Amara recognized from the sworn statements, all three of them looking like men who had finally set down something heavy they'd been carrying far too long. We all knew Cyrus, Marcus said, his voice shaking but not stopping. Every one of us on that dock knew for years. We were scared of what you'd do if we said anything. I'm not scared anymore. None of us are. Cyrus looked around the dining room, at Isaiah standing quietly by the corner table, at Marcus and the others near the door, at the regulars who had gone still in their seats, watching a man who had controlled this town's only shrimp dock for 20 years finally run out of anywhere to stand. Nobody in that room looked away from him. Nobody looked afraid. He turned and walked out without another word, and the screen door banged behind him one final time, and it was, everyone in that dining room would agree later, a much smaller sound than it used to be. Mr. Dunlow came in the following Tuesday, same as he had every Tuesday for longer than Isaiah had been alive, and he sat down at his usual spot at the counter looking like a man who had something to get off his chest. I owe you an apology, he said to Amara, turning his coffee cup around slowly in its saucer. When Cyrus started saying you were stretching product to cover up corner cutting, some part of me wondered if there was truth in it. I didn't want to believe it, but I let it sit in my head anyway. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Dunlow. I do, though. He looked up at her. Words all over town now about what that man was really doing out on that creek. Man complaining loudest about shrimp scarcity was the one causing half of it. And here you were the whole time, doing more with less because that's just who you are. And I let a bully's rumor make me doubt a woman who fed my family the truth on a plate every single day. He shook his head. Your rice bowl is the best thing on this menu, and it always was. I should have trusted my own tongue over his mouth. Pearl, 3 stools down, nodded without looking up from her own plate. Same. I'm sorry too. Wasn't fair. Amara felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since Cyrus first raised his voice in her dining room. Thank you both. That actually means more than you know. Zuri, Mr. Dunlow said, waving the little girl over from her corner table. Draw me something. I've got a few years left in me and I intend to spend some of them on your mama's cooking. Zuri beamed and grabbed her pencils, and for the first time since she'd walked into Simmons' house, with $4.30 to her name, Amara Whitfield let herself believe, fully and without reservation, that she had built something here that was actually going to last. The investigation confirmed everything within 3 weeks. Cyrus Devereaux's commercial shrimping and wholesale license was suspended pending a full hearing, and the State Attorney General's office opened a separate criminal inquiry into years of willful poaching violations, the kind of case, the investigating officer told Amara, that doesn't just cost a man his license, but can cost him his freedom, depending on what the courts decide. He never came back to Port Ellison's docks again. By the following spring, the wholesale operation had been sold off in pieces and 3 new independent buyers, including one run cooperatively by Marcus Deloach and the other young shrimpers who'd finally found their nerve, had taken over supplying the whole stretch of coast at prices nobody had seen in years. Shrimp came back slowly, the way anything protected long enough to heal comes back. 2 seasons later, the catch numbers were the highest they'd been in a decade. Simmons' house never went back to being just one dish. The classic shrimp and grits stayed on the menu, made the old way, the way Isaiah's hands remembered, even after his heart had forced him to slow down and teach somebody else to help carry it. The marsh broth bowl stayed too, and the rice bowl beside it. because by then everybody in Port Ellison understood that a recipe surviving didn't mean it stayed frozen in exactly the shape it started in. It meant it found a way to keep being useful to the people who needed it, even when the man who used to carry it alone couldn't carry it by himself anymore. Isaiah's heart healed the way Dr. Anand said it would, slowly on its own schedule, once the stress that had been sitting on his chest for years finally had somewhere else to go. On a quiet evening in October, after the dinner rush had cleared and Zuri had fallen asleep at the corner table over a half-finished drawing, Isaiah sat down across from Amara at the same table where she'd once told him what her old job had cost her. "I've been thinking about something my granddaddy used to say," Isaiah said. "Feeding somebody is never a one-way street. I remember, I fed you and Zuri one hot afternoon because you were standing at my door and I couldn't do anything else." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't know yet that you were about to save this whole place. That you were about to teach me that the thing I thought only I could carry could actually be carried by more than one person if I let it." Amara felt her throat go tight. "I didn't come here looking to save anything," she said. "I came here with $4 and a hungry kid. Everything after that just kept happening because you didn't close the door." "Marry me," Isaiah said. It came out plain, unpolished, exactly the way everything he'd ever said to her had come out. No performance in it, no rehearsal, just a man who had run out of better ways to say the truest thing he knew. Amara laughed, startled, her eyes wet. "That is the worst proposal I have ever heard in my life." "I know," he said. "I've never been good with words. I'm better with a stove. Ask me again. Properly." He took her hand across the table, the same hand that had once shaken while she counted out $4.30 in exact change. "Amara Whitfield," he said, "will you marry me?" Zuri, who had apparently not been as asleep as she looked, lifted her head off the table without opening her eyes all the way. "Can I call you Daddy if you say yes?" Isaiah laughed for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. A real laugh, one that shook loose something that had been sitting heavy in his chest for years. "Yeah, baby," he said. "You sure can." Amara said yes before Zuri had even finished the question. 6 months later, Simmons' house had a line out the door on Saturdays again. The kind Ezekiel Simmons used to talk about from the old days, the kind Isaiah had thought was gone for good. Amara's mother drove up from Beaufort most Sundays now, sitting at the same corner table where Zuri had once camped out with a box of coloured pencils and nothing else to her name. The eviction notice that had once sat folded on Amara's kitchen counter was long gone. Paid off in full the same month Cyrus Devereaux's license was suspended, and Zuri had started the school year in September at the same school she'd finished the year before. No third move, no third goodbye. The promise Amara had made her finally kept. "You did this, you know," her mother told her one Sunday, watching Zuri hand a finished drawing to a delighted customer at the next table. "All of it. Isaiah gave you an open door. You're the one who walked all the way through it." The photograph of Ezekiel still hung behind the register. Beside it now hung a small framed drawing done in careful crayon by a 7-year-old hand. 3 figures standing at a stove together, steam rising off a pot between them, all 3 of them smiling. Isaiah touched both frames most mornings the way he always had. "We're still standing, old man," he said quietly to the photograph most days before the doors opened. "Turns out you were right. Feeding somebody never was a one-way street. I just needed somebody to teach me that firsthand." Then he'd turn around and Amara would already be at the stove beside him, and Zuri would already be setting up her pencils at the corner table, and the whole day would start the way every good day at Simmons' house started now, with more than one set of hands on the pot. "I want to be honest with you about what this story is and what it isn't. It's fiction. Jaisiel, Amara isn't real. Cyrus, Zuri, Marcus, none of them exist. Simmons' house isn't a real restaurant, though I hope somewhere there's one enough like it. A few things in this story are real, and I put them in on purpose. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is a real medical condition. It's sometimes called broken heart syndrome, and it is triggered by severe emotional or physical stress, grief, financial strain, years of chronic overwork with no relief. It genuinely mimics a heart attack, and it genuinely can be life-threatening. Most people recover fully with rest and reduced stress, but the underlying cause has to actually change or it can happen again. If you are running yourself the way Isaiah was running himself in this story, please, for the people who love you, find a way to set some of it down before your body sets it down for you. Shrimp season closures are real too. Coastal states like South Carolina restrict shrimping during specific windows, specifically to protect juvenile shrimp populations so they can mature and reproduce. It's one of the quiet, unglamorous ways a shrinking natural resource gets a chance to recover when the law actually gets enforced. Illegal poaching during those closed seasons is a genuine threat to coastal ecosystems and to every family whose income depends on a healthy catch. Retaliation against whistleblowers is real, and it happens far more often than it makes the news. If you have ever done the right thing at work and paid for it anyway, I am sorry, and I want you to know it was not a character flaw. It was a decision that cost you because somebody else valued convenience over the truth. That is on them, not on you. Cyrus is fictional, but the kind of man who profits from a crisis he's quietly causing is not. People protect their own power by making sure the people around them never have enough information or enough support to challenge it. I don't think that makes them cartoon villains. I think it makes them frightened men who found a way to make their fear into other people's problem. That doesn't excuse it. It just means the story is more true than it looks. Amara is fictional too, but the kind of woman she isn't. I've known women who lost everything doing the right thing, who rebuilt something out of nothing because nobody else was going to do it for them, who kept a whole family fed on $4.30 and a stubborn refusal to disappear. If that's you watching this, I see you. You are not too much. You were never too much. You were exactly enough the whole time, even on the days it didn't feel that way. This story has a wedding at the end, and a villain who gets what's coming to him in front of a full dining room, and I know real life rarely wraps up quite that clean. I wrote it clean anyway, because sometimes you need to watch somebody's patience finally pay off, and the truth finally land where it was always supposed to land. Stories don't fix anything by themselves, but they remind you what's still possible. If any part of this hit close to home, tell me in the comments. Tell me about the meal that saved you once or the person who fed you when you couldn't feed yourself. I read every single one. Take care of each other out there.